remarkable. The unknown counsellor of a disappointed princeling had gradually risen to a position of European importance. His devotion to his master had been not only wholehearted, but cautious and wise. It was Stockmar's advice that had kept Prince Leopold in England during the critical years which followed his wife's death, and had thus secured to him the essential requisite of a point d'appui in the country of his adoption. It was Stockmar's discretion which had smoothed over the embarrassments surrounding the Prince's acceptance and rejection of the Greek crown. It was Stockmar who had induced the Prince to become the constitutional sovereign of Belgium. Above all, it was Stockmar's tact, honesty and diplomatic skill which, through a long series of arduous and complicated negotiations, had led to the guarantee of Belgian neutrality by the great powers. His labours had been rewarded by a German barony and by the complete confidence of King Leopold. Nor was it only in Brussels that he was treated with respect and listened to with attention. The statesmen who governed England, Lord Grey, Sir Robert Peel, Lord Palmerston, Lord Melbourne, had learned to put a high value upon his probity and his intelligence. "He is one of the cleverest fellows I ever saw," said Lord Melbourne, "the most discreet man, the most well-judging and most cool man." And Lord Palmerston cited Baron Stockmar as the only absolutely disinterested man he had come across in life. At last he was able to retire to Coburg, and to enjoy for a few years the society of the wife and children whom his labours in the service of his master had hitherto only allowed him to visit at long intervals for a month or two at a time. But in 1836 he had been again entrusted with an important negotiation, which he had brought to a successful conclusion in the marriage of Prince Ferdinand of Saxe-Coburg, a nephew of King Leopold's, with Queen Maria II of Portugal. The House of Coburg was beginning to spread over Europe, and the establishment of the Baron at Buckingham Palace in 1837 was to be the prelude of another and a more momentous advance. King Leopold and his counsellor provide in their careers an example of the curious diversity of human ambitions. The desires of man are wonderfully various, but no less various are the means by which those desires may reach satisfaction, and so the work of the world gets done. The correct mind of Leopold craved for the whole apparatus of royalty. Mere power would have held no attractions for him. He must be an actual king, the crowned head of a people. It was not enough to do; it was essential also to be recognised. Anything else would not be fitting. The greatness that he dreamt of was surrounded by every appropriate circumstance. To be a majesty, to be a cousin of sovereigns, to marry a Bourbon for diplomatic ends, to correspond with the Queen of England, to be very stiff and very punctual, to found a dynasty, to bore ambassadresses into fits, to live on the highest pinnacle an exemplary life devoted to the public service, such were his objects, and such, in fact, were his achievements. The Marquis peu à peu, as George IV called him, had what he wanted. But this would never have been the case if it had not happened that the ambition of Stockmar took a form exactly complementary to his own. The sovereignty that the Baron sought for was by no means obvious. The satisfaction of his essential being lay in obscurity, in invisibility, in passing unobserved through a hidden entrance into the very central chamber of power, and in sitting there quietly pulling the subtle strings that set the wheels of the whole world in motion. A very few people, in very high places, and exceptionally well informed, knew that Baron Stockmar was a most important person. That was enough. The fortunes of the master and the servant, intimately interacting, rose together. The Baron's secret skill had given Leopold his unexceptionable kingdom, and Leopold in his turn, as time went on, was able to furnish the Baron with more and more keys to more and more back doors. Stockmar took up his abode in the palace partly as the emissary of King Leopold, but more particularly as the friend and adviser of a queen who was almost a child, and who, no doubt, would be much in need of advice and friendship. For it would be a mistake to suppose that either of these two men was actuated by a vulgar selfishness. The King, indeed, was very well aware on which side his bread was buttered. During an adventurous and chequered life he had acquired a shrewd knowledge of the world's workings, and he was ready enough to use that knowledge to strengthen his position and to spread his influence. But then, the firmer his position and the wider his influence, the better for Europe. Of that he was quite certain. And besides, he was a constitutional monarch, and it would be highly indecorous in a constitutional monarch to have any aims that were low or personal. As for Stockmar, the disinterestedness which Palmerston had noted was undoubtedly a basic element in his character. The ordinary schemer is always an optimist, and Stockmar, racked by dyspepsia and haunted by gloomy forebodings, was a constitutionally melancholy man. A schemer, no doubt, he was, but he schemed distrustfully, splenetically, to do good. To do good? What nobler end could a man scheme for? Yet it is perilous to scheme at all. With Lehzen to supervise every detail of her conduct, with Stockmar in the next room, so full of wisdom and experience of affairs, with her uncle Leopold's letters, too, pouring out so constantly their stream of encouragements, general reflections, and highly valuable tips, Victoria, even had she been without other guidance, would have stood in no lack of private counsellor. But other guidance she had, for all these influences paled before a new star of the first magnitude which, rising suddenly upon her horizon, immediately dominated her life. 3. William Lamb, Viscount Melbourne, was 58 years of age, and had been for the last 3 years Prime Minister of England. In every outward respect he was one of the most fortunate of mankind. He had been born into the midst of riches, brilliance, and power. His mother, fascinating and intelligent, had been a great Whig hostess, and he had been bred up as a member of that radiant society which, during the last quarter of the 18th century, concentrated within itself the ultimate perfections of 100 years of triumphant aristocracy. Nature had given him beauty and brains. The unexpected death of an elder brother brought him wealth, a peerage, and the possibility of high advancement. Within that charmed circle, whatever one's personal disabilities, it was difficult to fail, and to him, with all his advantages, success was well nigh unavoidable. With little effort he attained political eminence. On the triumph of the Whigs he became one of the leading members of the government, and when Lord Grey retired from the premiership, he quietly stepped into the vacant place. Nor was it only in the visible signs of fortune that fate had been kind to him. Bound to succeed, and to succeed easily, he was gifted with so fine a nature that his success became him. His mind, at once supple and copious, his temperament, at once calm and sensitive, enabled him not merely to work, but to live with perfect facility and with the grace of strength. In society he was a notable talker, a captivating companion, a charming man. If one looked deeper, one saw at once that he was not ordinary, that the piquancies of his conversation and his manner, his free and easy vaguenesses, his abrupt questions, his lollings and loungings, his innumerable oaths, were something more than an amusing ornament, were the outward manifestation of an individuality that was fundamental. The precise nature of this individuality was very difficult to gauge. It was dubious, complex, perhaps self-contradictory. Certainly there was an ironical discordance between the inner history of the man and his apparent fortunes. He owed all he had to his birth, and his birth was shameful. It was known well enough that his mother had passionately loved Lord Egremont, and that Lord Melbourne was not his father. His marriage, which had seemed to be the crown of his youthful ardours, was a long, miserable, desperate failure. The incredible Lady Caroline, with pleasures too refined to please, with too much spirit to be at ease, with too